No man knows the day or the hour refers to what? Second coming. It could not, and I'll go over it quickly, because it could not refer to the rapture, because the rapture was revealed 20 years later by Paul in 1 Corinthians 15, 51, and 52, right? He says, behold, I tell you a mystery. Then he talks about the rapture. A mystery, or mysterion in the scripture, something that was hidden and now being revealed. So I would tell you, when you go through those parables and people say, see, we are not to know the day or the hour. The master of the house comes in unexpectedly. That's not referring to the rapture, because the rapture is not in the gospel. Okay? And there's a lot of other reasons why, even in context in Matthew 24 and Mark 13, but no man knows the day or the hour. Read it in context, which we did painstakingly. It always refers to the second coming, right? And here's the reasoning why people say it refers to the rapture, or at least in certain areas of theology, is because once the tribulation period starts, and we know the exact number of days in the tribulation period, right? 1260 plus 1260, 2,520 days. Once the tribulation period starts, then you know the second coming, right? It makes no sense. It's like saying, we will know the rapture on the way up. We will know the rapture on the way up. Which doesn't make any sense. Because you just added a condition to what Jesus said 2,000 years ago, which was not in the original premise. Which is, once the tribulation begins. What? You see what I'm saying? You can't add that later. Of course you're going to know once the tribulation. Then we also went through, I posted that video already on YouTube about once the tribulation begins, all the Christians are gone. And if most Christians aren't even studying that, you think the non-believer is going to know that? That the tribulation period is 2,520 days? And are you going to be able to keep time when you're just trying to survive and stars are falling from the sky and the sun's not giving us light? Are you going to keep time? No. In Amos, now get this. I just actually got this as I was getting another video ready for YouTube. I picked out and said, oh, I taught that. I forgot about that. It says that surely the Lord God does nothing unless he reveals his mystery or secret counsel to his servants, the prophets. That word for mystery, our secret counsel, is sod. And you know what the gematria is for that? 70. And which Jubilee are we coming up on according to Israel? 70. Get it? It's almost as though he's giving us a hint there that that secret or that mystery points to the 70th Jubilee, which points to his second coming. Which is kind of a nifty little thing. So here's what I want to go over. How certain things are lining up and we have to consider this. Okay? Quickly, Daniel 9:24 through 27. You have no business talking about prophecy unless you know that Daniel 70 weeks. Period. You have no business. Okay? In 9:24, Gabriel appears to Daniel, gives him in 4 verses the 70 weeks. Now that weeks is what? Weeks of years. And that throws a lot of Gentiles, but it's not strange to, if you know the Hebrew scriptures or, you're trained that way. So Shemitah is a week of years. And so this 7 70s are 70 Shemitahs is just the last set of Shemitahs for Israel, right? Remember we went through and we determined, 7 70s, which is 490 years. God dealt with Israel, and I already taught on this, in 4 periods of what? 490 years. Right. This is just the last period. I went through all that already, and I'm obviously not going to go through it now. So very quickly, we're going to look at this last cycle. 924 tells you the scope, 70 weeks. 70 weeks are determined for your people and your holy city. That's Daniel. The first 69 weeks, he gives us a time element from the going forth of a commandment to restore and rebuild Jerusalem was 69 weeks, right? And that was Xerxes Longimanus in 445 BC. I think it was March 14th, 445 BC. Then we had this strange thing where there's a gap in there. He talks about the Messiah being rejected and being karat or cut off. Okay? And then in this church gap, it goes all the way to the rapture. From the beginning, from the crucifixion to the rapture. Interesting. Now, here's what I want to deal with. 927. Very important. He says, and he. Who's the he? The coming prince. The Antichrist. Not the Christ. The Antichrist is going to make a covenant with the many. For how long? 1 week, which is the 70th week, which is what we would call the tribulation period. All right? So that's what we're to look for. Now, here's the usual interpretation of that verse. And I've done it myself. And it still may be true, and I'll tell you how it could change. It says, and he will make a firm covenant, or actually it's not firm, it's the Hebrew word gabar. He will confirm a covenant with many for 1 week, but in the middle of the week he would put a stop to sacrifices and grain offerings. Okay? It would seem the covenant has to do with the temple and with grain sacrifices and offerings. It would seem. But that's not what it says. Okay? It's just that the Antichrist is going to reconfirm now a 7-year covenant. And once that begins, guess what? Basically, that is the tribulation period. Requirements of Daniel 9:27, the covenant with the many. Okay, this is requirement for the 7-year covenant. Okay, number 1, it must be pre-existing. Okay, number 2, okay, it must be reconfirmed, because that's exactly what 927 says. It's an existing covenant. It must be reconfirmed. It must be made with who?
The many.
The many. That's all it says. It's just many. We just know whatever it is, it's a multiple. And it must be 7 years. Right?
Yes.
Is that reasonable?
Yes.
Amen.
Okay, so it's got those things. Because the word that he will make firm or reconfirm, gabar again, is a Hebrew word. And I first heard that years ago from somebody who lived in Jerusalem that was saying that, yeah, it's not make, it's reconfirm. All right, so right now, there is no real covenant we know that deals with sacrifices and offerings for Israel. Okay, and it could still happen. Now, there's another verse which I want to bring up real quick because we're going to see the language of it. And man, does it ever line up. Isaiah 28. Okay.
Isaiah 28.
Isaiah 28. 2 verses. Okay. It is verse 15 and 18 is what it is. This is possibly referring to the covenant, the 7-year covenant. And I'm going to refer back to this. And this is God talking. Because you have said, talking to Israel, we have made a covenant with death, and with hell are we at agreement. When the overflowing scourge shall pass through, it shall not come unto us, for we have made lies our refuge, and under falsehood we have hid ourselves. Verse 18, and your covenant with death shall be annulled, and your agreement with hell should not stand. When the overflowing scourge shall pass through, then you shall be trodden down by it. All right. So we see that it doesn't explicitly say in Daniel 9:27 that the covenant with the many has to do with the temple, nor does it say that it allows Israel to have sacrifices. All it does is, in the middle of the week, he's going to put an end to that, sacrifices and offerings. It doesn't say the covenant has to do with that. Everybody got that? So it's just kind of giving you a time element. Now, here's what I want to try to fit in there. And I'm not the only one, okay? We know about the SDG Summit, right? Everybody know what that is?
Yes.
The 2030 UN SDG Summit.
Yes.
All right? That's coming up in September. And when you see the dates of it and understand where some of the stuff falls, you're going to be floored, okay? Now, here's my first thing. Let's see if it fits, and this is the SDG 2030 Summit. This is what the UN is holding. Sustainable Development Goals. That's where the Club of Rome back in 1990 and 1991 wrote a book. That was an early forerunner of all this, and they said, hey, the way we can entrap and they admit it in this book, the way we're going to entrap everybody is through pollution and global warming. We're going to make them think there's a crisis, and then we're going to, that's how we're going to get them. They say it out loud, and then we sit there and we watch the Super Bowl, and then we say, oh, I don't worry about that. I'm a Christian, brother. Man, we are the lamest people ever. And I'm at the head of it. Okay. Now, let's look at that. It must be a pre-existing covenant. Do you know when the SDG agreement first came out in? 2015. And you know when the first countries to jump on board? Israel. Israel jumped on board in 2015. So it's almost like 2 7-year periods, huh? From there into now and then the last 7 years, almost. Anyways, and it says this in the Jerusalem Post on October the 11th, September 11th, Israel commits to the new UN Sustainable Development Agenda. At the top of the list is to eradicate poverty in all its forms everywhere, end hunger, promote gender equality, and combat climate change by 2030. This is back in 2015. So they jump right on board. Okay? Now, it must be reconfirmed. Let's see what the Secretary General report of the UN. who attached this to the 2030 summit, said, "First, I urge heads of state and government to recommit to 7 years of accelerated and sustained transformative action, both nationally and internationally, to deliver the promise of SDGs." So he's saying, we're going to reconfirm this covenant. So they're not just getting together to talk about the covenant, they're reconfirming it. The next thing is, must be made with the many. Who is the UN making this agreement with? But all the nations. All the nations. And when they reconfirm it, it must be for how long? 7 years. So that, what they're doing is, they're meeting this September 2023. 7 years from now is 2030 in September. That's interesting. So an existing covenant in 2015 is being reconfirmed, not just getting together to talk about it. They're going to reaffirm it, okay? And it's going to be for 7 years. Now get this. On the 2030 website is a banner for the summit. And below that 2030 summit, they have a little slogan. This is what the slogan is. A rallying cry for leaving no one behind. No one left behind. Hello?
Anyone left behind after the rapture?
Is that a phrase today? No, left behind? Isn't it funny they would use the slogan for being left behind for the rapture? And they're saying no one left behind. And the irony is they're all going to be left behind. Okay? They just happen to use that slogan. 1 Thessalonians 5:3 says this. For when they say peace and safety, then sudden destruction will come upon them as birth pangs upon a woman with child, and they shall not escape. Okay? Now this is from the UN website. The UN Secretary General said, in 2023, we need peace now more than ever. And in fact, the International Day of Peace is in September. They're saying peace and safety. Okay, all that's a coincidence, don't worry. Okay? And then in the UN Charter, it says this about peace under the heading of peace and safety to save generations from the scourge of war. To save generations from the scourge of war. What was that we read in Isaiah? The overflowing scourge shall not, overcome us. Now it's using that very same language in the UN Charter about peace and safety. The scourge of war. Okay? Now that's kind of interesting. But there's also some other issues that we have to deal with. Okay? Like, there is an order to things. Before we have the Antichrist, we got to have who? 10 kings, right?
Oh,
We're going to have 10 kings. Yeah, you guys knew it. I know it. You're just testing me. So in Daniel 2:42, we have Nebuchadnezzar's dream. And of course, the 10 toes are what? 10 kingdoms, 10 kings. And then we find out that that also correlates to the Revelation 17 or 13:1 vision. You have the beast come out, see they had 10 horns. And Revelation 17:12, those 10 horns are called 10 kings. So the 10 kings are going to rise up. Okay. Then in Daniel 7:7-8, it says this. After this I saw in the night visions, behold, a fourth beast, which is the last day's kingdom. Actually, it's Rome, the feet are. And it talks about how that beast had 10 horns. All right? And it said, verse 8, 7:8. I considered the horns, and behold, there came out from among them another little horn, before whom 3 of the first horns were plucked up by the roots. And behold, this horn had eyes like the eyes of a man, and a mouth speaking great things. It's also in verse 24. So we see after the rise of the 10 horns or 10 kings, then the Antichrist comes. So my question is, okay, in this whole scenario, where are the 10 kings?
Will we see the 10 kings before the rapture?
Very possibly. Because there's nothing that precludes that. We just won't see the Antichrist as the Antichrist.
Yeah.
So, I'm going to give you 3 possibilities of the 10 kings. One is, they've already got them picked. In other words, they've already divided the world into 10 regions, and they know who the kings are. They're just not revealing them. That's the most likely scenario. What's the BRICS nations? It's gold backed. It's not in debt. As opposed to currency like the dollar that's 50 trillion in debt and has nothing backing it but thin air. Which one are you going to put your money in?
BRICS.
The BRICS. I mean, come on. So, and there's 5 nations, which means there's 5 kings. I say, well, what's that mean? Well, guess what? In August, they've had 25 applicants, at least 25, to get into this BRICS. And guess how many they're going to take? 5 more. Now, the last possibility is the UN Security Council. Guess how many members it has? Wrong. 5. And guess how many they plan to let in? 5. So they're going to have 10 there. September 15th, you have, you know what that is? Feast of what? Trumpets. Guess when the summit is? The 15th, you have the Feast of Trumpets. The 16th and 17th, you have the actual summit. Isn't that funny? It occurs a day after. Wow. And then it's reconfirmed with the many. And do you know when that reconfirmation is going to start? September 25th. Why do I say that? Day of Atonement. 10 days later, right?
What's starting on that day? The STG for
When they reconfirm that 7-year covenant, I'm predicting it will start on September 25th. Because it makes it exactly 7 years. Jesus returns on Day of Atonement 2030, which is the year of Jubilee. First day of the year of Jubilee. Okay? So you have all that kind of lining up suspiciously. When you have a 7-year covenant being made with the many and it's being reconfirmed, and I sit there and say, "Ooh, I don't think that's it," because I'm in a structure of denominationalism, and the Bible doesn't say that. But also realize this: when they come up and reconfirm that covenant in the summit, they could add the clause right here for Israel to rebuild their temple. They could very well do that. Okay? And then it would fit that. So I'm just saying we could be out of here soon. Now, do I know that for sure? No. It could be a typological thing. In other words, it could be a pattern thing where maybe next year or the year after, then the actual thing happens. But we see, like, remember, prophecy is a repeating pattern. Number 1, remember the Talmud?
Yes.
and how it would document the year Jesus was crucified. He could only offer the kingdom in the year of Jubilee, and he was crucified 4 days later after he rode in Jerusalem offering the kingdom. We got to find out what year he died. And remember, it kept saying in the Talmud, 40 years before, right? The Great Destruction. What's the Great Destruction? The temple, which was 70 AD, and Jerusalem being destroyed, right? It said all kinds of stuff like the menorah went out every day for 40 years. Wow. How did that happen? And then it would talk about how the temple doors would open every night. And it took over 20 men just to open one of the doors. Okay, for 40 years. In Azazel, the scapegoat, on the Day of Atonement, 40 years in a row, they would put his red ribbon on the temple door, come back, it would be white. For 40 years, it didn't turn white. That's strange. And the lot for the goat of sacrifice came up in the wrong hand 40 times in a row for the Day of Atonement. So if they're talking about 70 AD, and you go back 40 years, where's that take you? 30 AD. Okay, that's kind of strange. Remember Anno Mundi, where if you just start Adam, year 1, then go forward. Don't worry about BC. Guess when Abraham was born? Abraham was born in 1948. Was the same year Israel was reborn as a nation. It's the same year Abraham was born. If you look at this, Psalm 90:10, remember what that was? That was the Rapture Generation, right? It says, if, a generation is 70 years, if by strength it's 80 years. In Psalms 90:10, it gives us 70 and 80 years as a generation, if by reason of strength. So here's what I did. Which one is it? Well, let's take the average, 75 years, right? 75 years. All right. Now, if you do that and you start in 1948, where do you end up? 2023 for the rapture generation that will fly away. Read it yourself. Psalm 90:10. We're going to fly away. That's that generation. It's going to be 70 by strength, 80. Let's go in the middle, 75. Go from 1948 when Israel's a nation. You end up in 2023. Psalm 90:10. Yes. And I'll give you 2 more that point to this time period. Okay? I've already told you this. God worked with Israel in 4 periods of 490 years, right? Which is 1,960 years. Now get this. Where did we start that clock? Working with Israel. 70 AD, because he was patient until 70 AD. Then he dispersed them, right? Yes. If you go to 70 AD and you add and say he's going to work with them again in that time period, where do you end up? 2030. He works with Israel again during their judgment and dispersion until 2030. Okay? And now the last one. 50-year and 49-year Jubilee Cycle, right? Which one's true? Both. So if you start in 30 AD with the 50-year, because that just keeps going and repeating. But if you go to 70 AD when they were dispersed and now the land in disobedience, then the rabbis say, well, you don't count the Jubilee year that year anyway. And you go with the 49 year, they only meet once in 2,000 years, and where's that? What year do they collide? The same Jubilee year. 2030. Those are not arbitrary dates. Now, I do not know, and I still say, yeah, I could be wrong. I don't know how to make it a stronger case than that, but I've just given you for the possible rapture this September. If it doesn't happen this year, what do? We celebrate. We have another year, even though we don't want to be here. But things are coming to a head in studying 2,000 years of Christian history. Christians, they got the Christians and they led them off to their death. And they were singing. Today, here in America, we have a different attitude. Okay? And that's why I put out my YouTube videos and get my 5 or 6 hits or whatever it is. I am not ashamed of Jesus. And I want them to come and get me when I'm screaming from the housetops. And I want everybody here to do the same thing. Be screaming from the housetops. And they come and get you. Don't pull out your gun and shoot them. Go with them and just preach the gospel to them. Seriously. Now, I don't know if it's going to come down to that. If the rapture is really that soon, then okay, we might escape that. But you know what? It's been granted to you for Christ's sake, not only to believe in him. Now, that would be for Christ's sake. Actually, yes, believing in him, it says, is a benefit to him, which I don't understand that. But it says, but also to suffer for his sake. Okay? Also to suffer for his sake. And we don't know about that in this country, do we? We have no clue what that means. So I'm still counting on that we'll be able to enter into the sufferings of Christ. I hope you do. You know? So we'll see. We'll see. Okay, guys? So that was kind of a heavy, serious message. And I just think that if this actually does line up, I would be amiss if I didn't share this with you. Now you see it. Now it's your responsibility. But you should be living that way anyways. That the rapture is this September. If it doesn't come, I guess you guys are going to fall away like everybody says, right? No. You start even shifting into a higher gear. Because if it doesn't happen this September, then the odds are it's going to happen next September. We are now in a rapture window. Amen. What that means is simply this year is the first year of the possibility of a rapture. Amen. As we go along, we learn more. It's based upon when Jesus is crucified. Most people just say, well, he works in 2,000-year segment. It's more than that. It's the year Jubilee. He could only offer and bring the kingdom in the year Jubilee. Okay? So from here, so we're going to say he was crucified anywhere from 30, and this is really stretching it, 33 AD. What does that mean? That his second return is anywhere from 2030 to 2033. What does that mean? The rapture is from 2023 to what? 2026. And that 33 is a really stretching date. It really stretches it. But we are now in the rapture window as far as I can tell. But for me to say he's going to come within the next 3 years, that's not putting myself on a limb, is it? You know what the average life of the country is? 150 years. Now, hang on. Now, you guys are thinking of this. The average life of an empire is what? 250 years. And guess what? We're about 3 or 4 years away from that. And so we've run our course. We've run our course, and we're about to fall from that ledge, okay?